What's the funniest reason you've been called into school to collect your child? 1. When my second daughter was in kindergarten, I was called by her school to come right away. Her behavior was so inappropriate that it was necessary for me to take her home immediately. When I arrived at the school, I asked the principal, what did she do? The principal wouldn't say, except that it was so serious that it was questionable whether she could continue as a student there. I thought, what could my daughter have done that would warrant such concern? I immediately went and saw that they had my very confused daughter sitting in the office. She said, Mom, I didn't do anything bad. I asked, what happened? The reason I had to pick up my child was that she and her best friend, a boy, would not stop holding hands while they were out on the playground. Now, it was my turn to be confused. They went on to say, this type of open, sexual display is unacceptable. I asked, what? Oh, surely, ma'am, you can't possibly condone this type of behavior. Did they kiss? I asked. Take each other's clothes off? Touch each other where they weren't supposed to? I mean other than to hold each other's hands? No. Incredulous. I asked, then why was I called here? I really don't see what the problem is. You approve of her holding hands with a boy? My daughter looked at us and said, he is my friend, and he doesn't have cooties like the other boys. 2. My son was in kindergarten. The teacher was teaching animal names and showed a picture of a donkey and asked for its name. My little guy had watched Pinocchio, Disney version, the night before and so raised his hand and said that it's also called a jackass. The whole class started laughing. The teacher lost her self-control and started screaming, then sent him to the office. After school, the principal called me to come over. I taught at the high school in the same district, and pick up my son. The principal explained to me, in front of my son, and that this was the first time he had seen a child so unruly as to curse in a kindergarten class and that he was suspending him so I could teach my son some manners. I explained that jackass is a common name for a male donkey, that he saw it used the night before in a Disney film, and if his teacher isn't adept enough to defuse the situation without screaming and embarrassing the kid, that was her problem not mine and there would be no suspension or any further consequences. The principal started to lecture me about supporting the teacher, until I reminded him that I am also a teacher, deal with stuff like this all the time without embarrassing my students in front of their peers. So if he wanted to push the matter, my next stop would be the district superintendent or school board. 3. Some may not find this funny until the end and I will probably catch hell for it, but that's their issue. My then 8-year-old daughter was being bullied by a freak of nature large kid a couple grades ahead at a combined school, literally twice her size. He would wait until no one was looking and shove her into the dirt hard. I did ask for better monitoring but to no avail. Finally, I told her to do the one thing I could think of to make it stop. I told her kick him in the balls as hard as you can and if you are sent home, I will have your back. Response was, Dad, isn't that dirty fighting? To which I replied, and what he is doing isn't. I told her even if she missed, he would figure what she was aiming for and move on to a lesser target. A few days went by before the call to come get her, because she's being suspended for fighting. I found out when I arrived that she nailed him good. On the ground, throwing up, I patiently waited through the principal's talk about fighting is bad blah blah. Then I told him I was happy to take her home. However, we were going to then hit the mall, lunch at her fave place, a new dress, a show at the cinema with popcorn. Lastly, an ice cream treat at the dairy bar, all to reward her for defending herself when no one else would. I told the principal the kid she nailed was probably never going to bother her again, but if he really wanted me to take her from school I would. He caved in after checking about the prior complaints I made and decided to keep her in class after all. Thought that was the end, but here is the funny. She comes home 1 week later with a you-know-what eating grin. I ask what was up. She says, you remember the big bully I kicked last week? I said, oh no, you didn't get him again, did you? Oh no, Dad, he doesn't come near me. He started picking on another even smaller girl. I told her what to do. 4. It wasn't a call to school to collect him, but a teacher pulling me aside at parent-teacher night to tell me she wanted me to speak with my son about telling silly lies. He was 12 years old at the time. I asked what she thought he had been lying about. She said, we were talking about commerce and taxes and he told the class he has a tax file number, issued to taxpayers. I told him he's way too young to need or be issued a tax file number, but he kept insisting he has one. I'm sure he's probably heard you mention having one and thinks it's something to show off about. Can you please have a talk with him about it? I said, I'll have that talk with him right now. While you're here, I called my son over. What have you been telling your teacher about having a tax file number? I asked. That I have one. He replied. And how did you get it? You applied for it. And why did I do that? Because I have a job. What sort of job is it? I help repot plants at the place where my dad works. And when do you work? At Christmas and school holidays and sometimes on weekends. And why did you need a tax file number for that? Because my boss takes tax out of my pay, so we can claim it all back. I looked over at his teacher. He wasn't lying. 5. I'm not sure that it's funny, but the only time I ever got called to school over our daughter was, at age 9, our daughter was being harassed by the 11-year-old school bully. He ended up fracturing her wrist, and putting her in a cast. About a month later, he confronted her again. It seemed he was blaming her for his having gotten into trouble for breaking her arm. She sprayed pepper spray directly into his eyes then into his open, screaming mouth then shoved the empty can in his mouth and used the cast to hit him in the crotch all on the public sidewalk in front of the school. It took 2 teachers to pull her off from him. 6. My oldest son was the picked on kid at school until about his junior year when he put the bullies in their place. You can read about that in another of my posts. However, this is about my youngest son. About his freshman year, same school, same vice principal. Get a call that I needed to come get him cause he's been suspended for 3 days. The vice principal won't tell me why. Just come in, please. Get to the school and I'm ushered into the VP office. My son is in a chair, VP at his desk. VP tells me my son threw a snowball at a car on the access road and knocked out the driver's window. I turned to my son and asked him, "No, Dad, wasn't me." "Know who it was?" "Yes, Dad." "Who?" "Can't tell you that. We were having a snowball fight and I started it and it's my fault. Besides, his dad will kill him." "So you are willing to take the punishment?" "Yes, Dad." "Okay." I turned back to the VP and asked, "Now what?" He was livid. He demanded to know who threw the snowball. He reminded me of the time my oldest beat up the bullies and informed me he could suspend my boy for the rest of the quarter. I turned to my son and asked again, but got the same answer. "It's Christmas, Dad. I'll take the blame. He has a hard time. Let it go." He ended up paying for the window. His teachers gave him his assignments and he kept up. He was also suspended until after Christmas. The VP and I didn't talk again. Side note, my son had an after-school job and had a little savings to pay for the window. Just before Christmas he did finally tell me who he was covering for. He told me they were not going to get a Christmas because of their money situation. My son pulled most of his savings and with a little help from me, bought the family kids gifts. We delivered them midnight Christmas Eve. 7. My son was in grade 6, and was attracted to a young lady in grade 7. Well, this blossoming barely pubescent relationship did not go unnoticed by other grade 7 boys. During lunch, one lad broke from his group walking by and slammed my son into his locker. My son bounced back and punched his attacker, dropping him. The melee was broken up and my son taken to the office. A bunch of the kids went to the office to plead his case as self-defense. I asked the principal why I was called in if this was the case. He explained that he asked my lad if he learned anything from this event, and my son thought for a moment, then responded, "Yes sir, I learned that girls think it is hot when a grade 6 beats up a grade 7. The principal said he had to turn and look at the wall so my son would not see him laughing, but he hoped I might address this with my lad later to avoid this becoming the norm.